I'm well, how are you?
I'm good.
Thank you.
Go ahead. You've been here before, so you know where to go.
Yes. I love your banisters, by the way.
Thank you, Troy. I had them made by a young man who just graduated from Mass College of Art.
What a lovely apartment you have.
Thank you, Troy. I'm glad you liked it. I like it.
I'm especially noticing the spit up here.
Oh, the
It's
drip
very
effect,
charming.
yes.
Yeah.
I'd always wanted paint up there dripping down, and a friend recently helped me, but we only ended up with 7 prongs. Then on my own I added several more. Then I added the yellow, and then with a pencil I made all the dark marks. Yeah, I quite like it. But as you see, I love color. There's not a surface in this apartment that isn't painted a color except for the skylight, the bathroom, and the baseboard, which are all white. God knows I have thought about every square centimeter of this apartment. And I take immense pleasure in living in this space I've created. It constantly brings me pleasure.
I know it's silly and I've commented on it before, but one of the things that I really, really admire is the row of flowers that you
Oh,
have.
the rose, the dried rose?
Yes.
Did I tell you why I did that?
Yes, to lower the
To lower the
Yeah,
eyesight. To lower the
I thought
line.
that was remarkably clever.
And to keep the space open so that air goes through it.
Mm.
That's a de Kooning lithograph. Yeah, he did very few. It's dated in 1970. And he did very few all at the same time. And that's one of the nicest ones, actually. And then, oh, this is a German 19th century landscape by a man called Anton Svengauer. There you have 6 Dogen altarpieces. The Dogen are a fascinating people who live in Mali. There are only about, a few 100,000 of them left, but their culture goes back 1,000 years. Obviously, they're simulating ladders, and they would have been used in religious ceremonies. There are 2 more pieces of African metal currency. They're from the Chamba people, and those, I'm gradually giving the rest of my African metal currency to the American Numismatic Society, which turns out to be one of the 4 greatest numismatic societies in the world, along with the British Museum, the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, and the Bode Museum in Berlin. And have you ever read the Old Testament?
Yes.
Oh, Jesus Christ! The killing, the murder, commanded by God.
Yes.
Okay, and I will raise you up, and you will be a leader of nations, and you will smite all your foes to the 9th generation, and their seed shall wither in the sands. I mean, the Old Testament God is fucking fierce.
Yeah.
He's hideous. And I mean, the incomprehensibility of Christianity. Abraham, you want to show me you really believe in me? Kill your son. Kill your only son. What a fucking thing to tell somebody. And then the fact that Abraham is willing to do it. Okay, fine, then you're
Right.
A+. Oh my God.
What were you raised as?
As a Baptist.
Okay. And
Yeah.
when did you realize that was not?
I think probably when I went to Columbia, to college, I began, well, I think I was never what you call an ardent Christian. In my senior year in high school, the beginning, I joined a church. It was the Evangelical and Reformed Church. I don't know why I joined that one. But I knew that I was going to be filling out college application forms. And in the slot that said religion, because they asked that in those days, I didn't want to write nothing.
Right.
I thought that would be held against me. So I joined the church, and then I could write Evangelical and Reformed. Boom. But that was very cynical. I didn't join it because I believed in it. And I think maybe the doubts about the validity of religion were planted in me by seeing how the religious members of my family behaved, often with hatred, and vengeance and such a lack of charity and kindness and sympathy and empathy. And I thought, if this is what you get when you buy this
Right.
bunch of weirdo myths about rising from the dead and immaculate conceptions and all that stuff, I'm not quite sure it's worth it. And then when I left home to go to Columbia at 18 in New York, I stopped. I didn't go to church anymore. I was very lucky because I was on a very good scholarship, which meant that I did not have to work during the school year. Some guys, they worked as waiters, and I didn't have to do that. And then I worked summers on construction jobs back in Indianapolis, and that helped me get by on a shoestring, but I got by. And yeah, I worked very hard in college. In the beginning, nothing made any sense, and I was terrified, and so that was a big spur to, late hours of study and renewed efforts and all that stuff. And then finally things began to click and started making sense, and by then I had developed these ironclad, very rigorous study habits. So that served me well, and I graduated well, yeah.
It's always sort of interesting. Just the other day I was commenting to a friend of mine that it's bizarre how we expect, like, such major life decisions to be made at such a young age.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're
You're 18 now, so choose a major that will affect you for the rest of your life.
For the rest of your life. I know it's a shame. It's a real shame because ideally the 4 years of college should be a period of exploration and discovery, in which people should be taking courses that seem strange or weird to them, like Micronesian history or the
things that interest you or that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's funny. It's hard to explain to people when you're a professor that teaching 9 hours a week doesn't mean that you work only 9 hours a week. People just don't get it. Yeah. They hear that you teach 9 hours a week and
they just think that you're just la-di-da the rest of your time.
Yeah. And we did a self-study in my English department many years ago. That would have been, 30 years ago. And it was a self-study, admittedly, okay? We were not being held to a high judicial bar of truth and honesty. But we concluded that during a semester, we worked an average of about 70 hours a week, which made sense to me. Because in addition to the teaching,
you have office hours.
Well, office hours. You have these fucking committee meetings, which are, and especially at UMass Boston. I didn't have any committee assignments at the University of Paris, thank God. But at UMass Boston, they're committee crazy. So I would often be on 9, 10 committees throughout a semester. Wow. You have your research, your writing for publication.
Right.
You have a lot of additional chores like reading for honors awards. So all of the seniors' honors papers may, if you're on that committee, then you have to read all of that. Serving on the personnel committee, which is onerous beyond belief. And then tenure committees and so on. So yeah, it takes a lot of time. But I loved it. For 31 of the 32 years I did it, I absolutely loved it. I woke up every morning.
You're going to have to explain that 1 year in which you did not love it.
I suddenly decided I cannot stand reading one more freshman composition. I can't bear it. There has to be something else in life. The average American freshman college student can't write very well.
Right.
And I actually enjoyed teaching composition. I was about the only person in my department who did. But there's you have to unteach so much stuff to get students to write well. I think there's a limit to how much absolutely abominable prose anybody can read in one lifetime.
So tell me about this piece.
Well, it's another piece in my African metal currency collection. It's called a bride price. So a groom would have given the prospective bride's father that piece as a kind of a reverse dowry. Normally in the West, dowry means money that comes with the woman to the husband's estate. Here, the man, the prospective bridegroom, gives a dowry piece. And on the wall there, you have the hat of a Cameroon king, which I bought in New Orleans, and is special because today they make them with chicken and turkey feathers. Those are made with the original feathers. I don't know what kinds of birds, but that one's about 100 years old.
Wow.
And it's a bitch to dust. On the wall there in the background, that's a 19th century samurai hat, Japanese samurai hat, called a jingdasa. That is a painting by Mori Sosen, who was in 17th, 18th century Japanese painter, who's called the Monkey Master. And the story is that he had a shop in Kyoto or Edo, I'm not sure, and one day heard customers looking at his work saying he doesn't do monkeys very well. So he closed his shop, went into the forest, and lived for 10 years with monkeys, came out, and began painting them, and instantly acquired the nickname the Monkey Master.
So you've surrounded yourself with very interesting people, and also with very interesting things.
Thank you.
Yes. Let's talk a little bit about how that came to be, like that you would create such a wonderful environment.
Well, I think partly it's that I grew up in an alcoholic home where everything was always an emotional mess. And it created a profound desire in me for a home where things were not an emotional mess, where things were orderly and tidy and well arranged. And also I have always loved William Morris's observation that the most important work of art is a beautiful home. I love that. And during the course of my life, I bought what I like.
Okay.
And it doesn't really matter to me whether it fits into a category. Although I ended up collecting. Twice I bought things thinking I can make money out of this, and both times I screwed myself. Both times I bought fakes, expensive fakes.
Oh no.
Yeah, I got my money back, but the only two times I've collected are when I was in Paris teaching the first time, and it was my exposure to African art. And the art market took off and left me behind in terms of conventional African art, like wooden sculptures and things like that. But at the same time, I discovered African money, African currency, pre-colonial. Because in those days, in the entire lifetime of an average African, he would only be engaged in maybe 10 exchanges. You know, like I would buy your daughter for 5 goats and those 2 pieces of currency. You would buy several gallons of palm wine from me, and maybe later on I'd buy an acre of land from our neighbor. Very few, and there were no pockets in their loincloths for money to carry on. So the exchanges became communal and ceremonial. The entire village would gather for this exchange, and therefore the money became ceremonial too. And many of the pieces are shaped on the basis of utilitarian forms. Those are obviously imitating bracelets or necklaces. Okay, so I did collect that seriously for a long time, and I've given a lot to the Museum of Fine Arts here in Boston, and now I'm giving the rest of my collection to the American Numismatic Society in New York. About 10 years ago, I switched from African metal currency to Chinese scholar rocks. And I'm now giving those to the Indianapolis Museum.
And forgive me, what are Chinese scholar rocks?
Scholars who could not afford the gigantic stones and didn't have the gardens big enough to accommodate them, they began acquiring smaller stones of interesting shape and color and texture and all that stuff, which they would put on their desks for objects of contemplation. And because the Chinese have a really profound respect for nature, and so having a piece of nature on your desk creates this immediate connection with it for you. These 2 rocks both come from my dealer, Kamin Hu, who lives in Newton, and is probably the world's best known and best dealer in Chinese color rocks. The one on the right is my favorite of all my rocks. And I found it in a catalog that Camille produced. I asked her if by any chance it was for sale, and she said that it was owned by a family in China. She thought they did not want to sell. She would check and get back to me. I forgot all about it, and about a year later she called and she said they're willing to sell it to you for a certain amount of money, and it will cost $600 to ship it. And I was delighted. I think it's absolutely magnificent. It's called a Lingbi rock, and that's the most highly prized of all the categories. It has 70% metallic content, so when you hit it with metal, it rings like a bell.
So we return to your days in New York as a golden boy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what was it like? Like, tell me more.
It was
about
very
it.
glamorous. I mean, you know, it was fabulous. I slept with almost anybody I wanted to. I was invited everywhere. In fact, I mean, I turned into a very unappealing young man in that I was because my psychology was so fucked up, equating being desired sexually with full acceptance as a complex human being. I would often accept 3 and 4 invitations for the same night, wait until the last moment, decided where I wanted to go, and I wouldn't even bother canceling the other people. I moved to Boston partly to be psychoanalyzed, well, to be therapized, I guess is the word, by one of America's most famous psychiatrists, psychoanalysts, Robert Coles at Harvard, author of some 20 books. And I always went out, I drove out to Concord for our sessions, and I saw him 4 times a week for 8 months, 2 to 3 hours a session. It was very intense.
Vigorous, yeah.
And very early on, I found myself telling him this, that I would accept 3 and 4 invitations for the same night, wait till the last minute, decide where I wanted to go, not cancel the other 3 people. I was so appalled at hearing myself say this, I never did it again. Which I think is one of the great values of therapy, is that if you're telling terrible secrets to somebody else, they take on a kind of reality they never have when they exist only inside your own head. Because you then have to see them via the other person's perspective as well as your own.
Right.
It was glamorous. It was wonderful. It's always nice to be invited and always nice to be desired. I loved the sex part. I loved being able to see.
Do you have a couple of notable lovers?
2 movie stars, Anthony Perkins and Tab Hunter. The young people these days probably don't know those names. Do you know who they are?
I do.
Tony Perkins in Psycho.
I used to watch a lot of older movies.
Yeah, and Tab, actually, I was interviewed for a documentary that's coming out, I think this coming year, on Tab. But Tab, for 2 years in a row, was the #1 box office Hollywood star. He also did songs, and one of his songs, I don't know which one, was the #1 song in the United States for a while. So he was really a hotshot in his glory days. And I first had an affair with Tony, who told me that he and Tab had an affair for 7 years. Then, shortly after that, I met Tab in London, and we had an affair, which was great. It was one of the great affairs of my life. Because he was, for me, the most beautiful man on earth. And this most beautiful man on earth was sending flowers to my flat every day and taking me for drives in the English countryside in his Mercedes convertible and wooing me. I mean, I couldn't believe it. And I wasn't putting out because I had a lover in New York whom I thought I should be faithful to. Finally, I gave him. So it was fun. It was fun. It was glamorous. It was great. And then it was very hard to give up. When I moved to Boston at the age of, what was I? I want to say 30. I went out to gay bars, and I was a name dropper. Okay, so but the guys that I met in gay bars, they didn't recognize me, like Lucchino Visconti, and they didn't know who Lenny Bernstein was, and all of my famous friends, and it was very hard to find myself without my glamorous past here in Boston, I mean, just another guy. I mean, I was still considered attractive. I still made out and all that stuff. But that was very glamorous in New York. And also, in those days, the gay world was much, much smaller, but deeply intertwined. And so, if you met somebody, well, it was easy for me in New York to meet anybody I wanted to meet in the gay world, okay? And that meant the arts. So I knew Jerry Robbins very well. I knew Lenny Bernstein quite well. Bill Inge was a good friend of mine. Playwright, wrote Picnic and Bus Stop and a bunch of other things. Splendor in the Grass. Had dinner with Bill regularly. Frank Scavullo, the famous photographer, did my model photographs, and knew Tennessee Williams and so on. And then I had a lot of European connections. And I say in my memoir at a certain point that my address book, it was full of names of Belgian bankers, French counts, Italian dukes, and the phone rang, you know, at least every other day with somebody calling from Europe to invite me to a trip on his yacht or a voyage, you know, to the Schloss in Germany or whatever. It was easy turning my looks and my desirability into social entree. I spent one New Year's Eve party with the Duke and Duchess of Windsor. I mean, you know, I didn't spend a lot of time chatting with them. In fact, she was extremely vulgar. One of the foulest mouths I've ever heard. There's a painting right now in the Goya exhibit at the Museum of Fine Arts, which was above the couch in the Park Avenue apartment where this New Year's Eve party went on, which included the Duke and Duchess of Windsor. So enormous social entree, incredible sexual opportunities.
Was HIV or AIDS a concern?
No, absolutely not at all. So unprotected sex constantly around the clock. HIV became a problem in my 40s in Boston, and I remember vividly. And I went to the baths in Boston, and I had great times in the baths here into my 40s. And I went to Paris to teach at the University of Paris. And I remember just before I left, we began hearing about something called a gay cancer. Nobody said HIV. Nobody said AIDS. A gay cancer. But there were a few instances of it. And we learned that we should be careful, though it wasn't quite sure what that meant. And I also read, before going to Paris to teach for 6 months, that in all of France there were 9 cases of this gay cancer. So I went to the baths constantly in Paris and had unprotected sex all the time. Because when you have 9 cases out of a population of 50 or 60 million people, you know, you're safe. When I came back, after 6 months, people then were talking about AIDS. And it's funny because in that period, that was the transition for me between going to bars and baths and not going. It was as if during those and I had great sex in Paris during the 6 months, and I ended up with a gorgeous boyfriend who came to the States to visit, but it was as if in that period I lost my interest in bars or started thinking of myself as no longer a hot item on the gay meat market. So just when it became very important to be careful about sex in the United States, I stopped going to the places where there was any invitation to be uncareful. If you were gay in the United States, when I came out, which is 1957, you moved either to San Francisco or New York. If you could. Okay, nowhere else. Maybe Chicago. Maybe. And it was so concentrated, so it was so easy to meet a variety of people and ages and professions and tastes and all that stuff. The fact that we were a smaller group meant that the fear of exposure was greater. And of course, I mean, you lived your life hearing every day on the radio some denunciation from a member of Congress about how unnatural, perverted, damned you were. That was a hard load to carry. It still goes on. It still goes on. You find these rabid right-wingers, denouncing gay people
Right.
constantly. And then I think most of the guys I knew who were successful in their careers, they all had beards. You know what a beard is,
Yes.
right? A woman who
yeah.
invite out, who creates the pretense that somehow they were straight.
Right.
Almost everybody had beards, except for ballet dancers, ribbon clerks, which is what we call people who worked in department stores.
Ah.
Ribbon clerks. And interior decorators. Those people didn't have to go through any pretense. But Jerry Robbins was closeted. Arthur Lawrence was out. Steve Sondheim was closeted. Jerry had a succession of beards. So toward the end of his life, he was a little more comfortable about being seen in public with young men. But I don't think Jerry ever came out. And Steve now is out. But it took forever for him to come out. Arthur was almost always out. And Lenny, of course, married and had 3 children. And so it was easy for him to pretend to be straight. Everybody knew that his preferences were gay.
And I imagine it's sort of complicated, matters socially to have to...
For Lenny?
Well, just in general, to either have a beard with you or to have to... That fear of being... of
I think it depended on who you were. I don't think Lenny... Well, it's funny. I was going to say I don't think he gave a shit. If you were Lenny Bernstein, you could get away with anything. He was one of the most famous people in the world, okay? On the other hand, it's very... I think that he didn't care that much about whether people thought he was gay or straight, and he had the wife and he had the children. And so he liked sleeping with boys. So what? He was like so virile, he was bisexual. Okay? Omnisexual, let's say. But there was a lot of risk involved in being exposed as a gay person in those days, because you could easily be fired. I mean, there was no kind of job protection. There were no gay rights.
Right.
There were no gay rights organizations. There was nobody. Well, there was the Mattachine Society. This faint voice on the horizon. The politicians paid no attention to whatsoever. So you could lose an awful lot. And when I was in college, I had a great friend the first 2 years. And during those 2 years, I was exploring I had a lover at Columbia, actually. And I didn't know anything about the gay world until my lover and I broke up. And I began discovering there was a gay world out there. And shortly after that, my best friend at Columbia, I told him one night that I was gay. He dropped me. We've been best friends. He just dropped me. That was it. So you could lose a lot. Not just friendships, jobs, apartments. You could be evicted.
Jeez.
Yeah, it was risky being out.
How did you navigate that sort of field? Like, were you just constantly
You had to be
stone-faced?
extremely careful. Well, most gay guys pretended they were straight. Except when they were in gay situations. And that's one reason why in those days, not only did gay bars offer you the opportunity for sexual adventure, but they were a relief. It was a relief to go inside a gay bar because that was the one place where you could relax. Where you knew that being what you were was not going to cost you anything. Except for the times when the police raided. And they raided all the time in Manhattan in those days, and they would arrest people, and often the next day those names would be in the papers.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And those people would be fired, and they would lose their apartments, they would be evicted and stuff like that. So there were regular raids, especially from bar owners who didn't pay off the cops. So there was a lot to be lost, and you had to be extremely careful. I lived with a guy, I can say his name, Oscar de la Renta, because he's now dead. And we lived together 2 years, and do you know who he was? He was a dress designer. Early on, a man tried to blackmail Oscar. And I was so impressed by Oscar's behavior. He got a telephone call in which this man threatened to blackmail. He agreed to meet the guy. He hung up the phone. He picked it right back up. He called the FBI. I was so impressed with him because I would have been terrified. I wouldn't have known what to do. And so an FBI guy came and hid behind a screen at the meeting with the blackmailer. And as soon as the guy threatened Oscar, the man stepped outside and arrested him.
Wow.
That was the end of that. So, you know, I mean, the threat of blackmail was common. It wasn't unusual at all. And as I say in my memoir, guys were disinherited. They still are. Kicked out of their homes by, appalled parents. And in those days, thank God this doesn't go on anymore. Parents often sent their sons to shrinks. And sometimes they were submitted to shock therapy.
Have you known people who committed suicide, or?
Yeah. Yeah, when I was young in New York, a lot of very beautiful people committed suicide. Actually, two people come to mind. When I was in Paris the first time, I met in a gay bar one night a Spanish count and his unbelievably beautiful, blonde, English, kept boyfriend. I mean, one of these people, they walk down the street, everybody stops and stares. Okay, he was breathtakingly beautiful. And they took me to some gay clubs and they said, let's do this again tomorrow night. I said, fine. The gay count was a great friend of Oscar de Lorenzo, who was at that time working in Paris. He called Oscar the next morning and said, join us. There's an American young man I think you'd like to meet. So then the four of us went out that night. And I was intrigued by the beautiful, kept, blonde boy. I had never known a kept boy before. I was at the time 22. And I said to the English boy, probably having had many drinks, I said, what would you do if you ever lost your looks? And without batting an eyelid, he said, I'd kill myself. That same night, he and the Spanish count were in no, he was alone, in an Alfa Romeo, a gift of the Spanish count. And he got drunk, and he was driving his car at something like 85 miles an hour across one of the bridges, across the Seine, and he drove it into a lamppost. He had something like 80 stitches on his face. 48 hours later, he killed himself. Then I knew a guy who was David, who was kept by George Aarons. George was one of the richest people in the United States. This is 50 years ago. And George his family had sold the Duke family all of the land for the tobacco farms. And he imported Ferraris. He lived in Coconut Grove. And he kept a young man named David. And David's best friend was a guy called Donnie Nardona, whom I had an affair with in Coconut Grove, and that's how I met David and then George. And George, the rich man, he was very sweet, and he and David had been together for about 11 years. I remember because I spent their 11th anniversary evening at dinner with them, and they quarreled the entire evening. Shortly after that, George met another he had met David when David was a barefoot 18-year-old looking for a job on George's yacht. Well, shortly after the 11th anniversary, David met another beautiful 18-year-old barefooted boy and set up housekeeping with him. He gave David $25,000 and 48 hours to move out.
Wow.
David moved to New York. Didn't move. He went to New York, and he went through the $25,000 in a week, holed up in a cheap hotel, and drank half a bottle of scotch and about 40 sleeping pills. So, and David was then 30. He was like 29. I was lucky in that I knew at the age of 29, on the verge of my 30th birthday, that my gravy train would not go on forever. I knew that I wasn't going to be constantly invited to opening nights on Broadway with, house seats on the aisle. That the invitations would not keep coming forever, and I thought, you've got to have a career. Without thinking very much about it, I decided, okay, professor, because I had loved my college education. I had always admired my professors. So I applied to graduate school, got in, got my PhD, and got my first job here at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. So I was lucky. I found meaningful work. Freud was once asked to define joy, and he said, oh, joy, that's easy. Joy is love and work. And it's a brilliant definition of joy.
So you really lived with Oscar de la Renta for 2 years?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Wow. What was that like?
Well, it was great, except that I could not return his sexual interest. I mean, the first time we had sex was at Mont Saint-Michel on the English Channel. He was very sweet. When I met him, I was about to leave Paris, and he asked, is there anything you've not done in Paris, in France, you'd like to do? I said two things. I'd like to go to the Folies Bergère, and I'd like to go to Mont Saint-Michel. And he took me to both. And at Mont Saint-Michel, we were in a hotel room. It was freezing cold. And I said, may I come join you in bed? And I did, and we had great sex. And it was mutual, and that was the only time it was mutual. But he desired me sexually, so we had a lot of sex, and I would take drugs or drink a whole lot to help that happen. But he was I should say is, I can't get in my head the fact that he's dead. It's only 2 months ago. I dreamed about him actually just last night. He's dying. He was a great companion. He was a great reader. He knew tons of stuff. He was endlessly curious. He was a fabulous conversationalist, great wit, great style, and he knew incredible people. I think Oscar knew anybody he ever wanted to know. I don't think anybody ever turned down an offer of friendship from Oscar de la Renta. The two most charming people I ever knew in my life were Oscar and Luchino Visconti, the Italian filmmaker, opera director, play director. And they set me wondering what it is that constitutes charm. And I think it's the ability to make people you're talking to think that when you're talking to them, they are the most important person you are the most important person in their life. Right. You are the most interesting person in their life. That's what I mean. Okay? But it was great fun. And we traveled a lot. We went around the world. Together we were in Hong Kong when John Kennedy was assassinated. Oscar immediately returned to the United States because he was friendly with some of the Kennedys. I went on to Japan. But we traveled a lot. We did great things together. But he was a great companion. Yeah.
Isn't that Elaine Stratton?
Yeah, she was an old friend. Yes, we were in Sail Away together, the Noel Coward musical.
It's so sad when she passed away.
Yes, I know. Well, last year, and also, I lost so many friends last year. She died, Oscar de la Renta died, John O'Keefe in Brooklyn died. Incredible. But you get to my age, which is 77, and more people die. That's Luchino Visconti, who was a great friend, the Italian movie director, opera director, and stage director. And there's Noel, with an inscription that says, for Alan upstairs, with my love, master. I lived one floor above him in a famous building, 404 East 55. And when we first met, he couldn't remember my last name, so he called me Alan Upstairs. So, for Alan Upstairs with my love, master. Tab Hunter, we were boyfriends in London. Great, great affair. One of the nicest sexual memories of my life. This is very special. This is a Lindy rock. I adore it. It's absolutely fabulous. I had the base made for it, but it's very, very special. It's an old rock. Old, that is, all rocks obviously are old, but old in terms of collecting. This is what's called a landscape rock for obvious reasons, horizontal, and it suggests a mountainous landscape. And it comes from what was the greatest private collection of scholar rocks in the world, the Robert Rosenblum collection here in Boston.
What was it like going to bars?
Well, I went to bars from the time I hit Columbia at the age of 18 until I went into AA at the age of
Well, do you feel
62.
there
No,
was,
65.
do you feel like there was like a large difference in terms of like bar culture during those years, or?
Yeah, I mean, when I was going to bars, they were much more mixed. Racially, age-wise, class-wise. Rich guys, poor guys. White boys, black boys. Old men, young men. Yeah. And then that began to disappear, and bars became very specialized, so they were only twinkers, or they were only old men. You would find bars with old men and then hustlers who would come because they knew they could find clients. But I really missed the mix, and it may be that Boston is worse in that regard than Manhattan. I don't know if there are any gay bars. Are there any gay bars in Boston now, where there are mixed, rich and poor, and old and young, and black and white, and drag queens and butch truck drivers and all that stuff?
Yeah, I don't actually know. I've been to at least 2 gay bars in Boston, but I've sort of given up.
How long have you been here, sir?
I've been here I'm going on my 3rd year.
Yeah, and you've been to 2 bars in 3 years?
Yes.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Are you typical of a young gay man these days in not going to gay bars?
Well, I don't know. I don't feel like that's the case, but I could be wrong. If only because in Florida, the bar scene is completely different than the bar scene is here in Massachusetts.
How so?
In Florida, I would go with a colleague of mine. She just loved gay bars, and so we would go together, and we would go to 2 or 3, in a night. Like, we would just go to several different ones.
Well, what city are we in?
We were in Orlando.
Orlando. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And so we would start off on the western side of the city, and there was a bar. It was called Mr. Sisters. It's no longer there.
Mr. Sister?
Mr. Sisters. Yes, Mr. Sisters. And it was stunning. It was on a lake, and there were dancers, and the drinks were nice, and we would go and we would sit and we'd chat with the dancers, and it was a good time. And then we'd go to another one, and sort of same thing. There'd be different dancers. It would be a whole sorts of a mix.
Right.
There would be there was always pool tables in case you didn't want to dance. That sort of thing.
So basically, it sounds like you went more to socialize than to cruise.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then coming up here, it was just. It seemed that either I was just going on the wrong nights, or...
Probably not.
But it was just sort of empty, or when it wasn't empty, it was jam-packed and the music was so loud you couldn't have a conversation.
Right, I hate that.
Yeah.
Yes,
So
that's something else that changed about the bars, and I hated that.
Yeah.
I hate loud restaurants. I hate loud anything where you can't talk.
Yeah, it defeats the purpose in a way.
Yeah. Well, it's great for people who have nothing to say.
I suppose that's true.
Yeah. So young gay guys your own age, right?
Sure.
Do they rarely go to gay bars, or do they go a lot?
The ones that I know don't
Really?
go. Yeah. No.
Well, I hear the bars have suffered because of online hookups and dating and
sure.
all of that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You no longer need to go to a specific location to find someone to...
You can find out how many pubic hairs a guy has before you even meet him. Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah, in a sense. Yeah. And I imagine that's sort of changed the game dramatically.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure. Do you like Ayn Rand? See you later. Bye. I will not blow anyone who likes Ayn Rand. So how do you live your gay life? You have sex, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so where do you meet guys?
Online.
Oh, you're sending it.
I have a boyfriend who I met online,
Yeah.
And yeah, that's how that
A lot
happened.
of people have boyfriends they met online. Some people are married to people they met online.
Yeah, yeah, which is a whole new thing.
I decided that I wanted to line my hallways with Cuba textiles. So I push pinned them into place, and then I measured, and then I went to that art supply store, Pearl, I think, in Central Square, and I bought the frames, and then I stapled them together, and then I covered them in black cloth and stapled that, and then I sewed the textiles. These, I suppose you could call the bedroom of the scholar rocks. There's so many here. That is my largest scholar rock. It's a Lingby rock, but it doesn't have as high a content. This is a Lingby. There you can hear how, and they make chimes actually out of Lingby rocks in graduated sizes from tiny to huge. You find them still today in Chinese temples. That's a Laotian green rock. This is a Taihu rock, a yellow wax rock, another Lingby rock. I've had affairs, many throughout my life, but not now for like 30 years. But I did have a relationship.
30 years.
I did have a relationship for, I don't know, 6 months with a guy, and I think it was maybe the only time in my life I really was in love. In the sense that I had the feeling about him that if he ever became very, very sick, I would not mind cleaning up his vomit and his diarrhea.
Interesting.
And I'd never had that feeling about anybody before. So it came to nothing. He moved to California and is now married to a guy who I guess is willing to clean up his vomit and his diarrhea. But it was the first time I had a glimmering of what I thought it meant to be in love with somebody or to love somebody really profoundly.
Interesting.
But I've never before, all of my relationships pretty much were with very, very, very handsome, sexy men. And it was, I think, the fact that they were gorgeous that drew me. And it, and those things don't, well, no, I've had affairs that went on for like 2 years.
Do you think that was mutual? Do you think that some of them really sort of started falling in love with you?
I don't know. I hope they had more going for them than I did for me. The last real love affair I had, we lived together for 2 years. And at the end of it, I thought to myself, I don't think we have anything in common. I met him when he was a graduate student at Princeton, and I was a graduate student at Rutgers, so we were academics. He was gorgeous. We were kind of a celebrated couple in Manhattan. And that can be a kick. You can get pleasure out of that.
See and be seen.
What?
See and be seen.
Yeah. We enjoyed travel, but I never see him anymore. He finally married a woman and had 3 children. And he was that kind of gay man who could do that. I think he decided that gay life was not nourishing for him somehow. Have you had love affairs?
I have had boyfriends. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
What's the difference between a boyfriend and a love affair for you, since you qualify?
I don't know. I love affair seems far more sensational to me. It seems very, it's like late night rendezvous and secret trips out of town and
Right.
I don't know. It seems like a different kind of romantic.
Like uber romantic?
I don't know. Just sort of separate in a way. Just sort of like a different category of, I would lump it in with trench coats and secret meetings and cafes. And
Okay, so it is uber romantic for you. So what's an affair? Just sex?
I suppose, yeah. Well, no, because an affair could be more than just physical. It could be emotional as well. But an affair seems more temporary to me. It seems more passing.
It sounds that way, yes.
Yeah. Have you dated within the 30 years?
You know, it's so funny because... You mean the last 30 years?
Yeah.
When I lived 8 doors down, there was a gay guy on the floor below me. And this was 25 years ago. And we were talking. I think I was probably complaining one day that I didn't have enough sex or something like that. And he said, well, Alan, do you ever date? I said, Tom, I don't even know what date means. What is dating? And he said, you know, like going to a movie with somebody. Oh, that's what dating is. Okay, well, I suppose I can start dating. I never dated, no. No, because, see, when I was young and came out and began living a gay life, basically, when I met a guy, if we were attracted to each other, within half an hour, we were in bed.
Right.
There was no dating. There was no
I think
need.
I've once heard it referred to as a gay handshake.
Yeah, there was no need for dating, for that insurance stuff. It just got in the way. Slowed things down.
Well, then, if you don't, have you had sex in the last 30 years then?
I have had escorts in the last 30 years. A couple times I've had sex in very surprising ways. There was a young man who read my book, called me up, insisted on coming to Boston to visit me. He was 22 and I was then 60. I said, fine, dandy. He sounded bright on the phone and he came up and within 5 minutes we were in bed having sex. That really surprised me. And then in London, about 15 years ago, this wonderful kid from Rio took a fancy to me in a gay bar, which very much surprised me, and we had sex a few times. Mostly I have escorts.
Escorts?
Hustlers.
Hustlers?
Yeah, I pay guys for sex.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Really?
Yeah, which is extremely efficient.
Oh,
and uncluttered.
That's quite true. That is efficient.
You know exactly what the score is. The amount of money I spend on escorts is minimal compared to the amount of money I spent when I was going out to bars and meeting people and dinner and da-da-da-da-da. And then my last few quasi-relationships, well, the last one, about $12,000 ended up going his way. He was having a hard time, and then he moved to Chicago, and he needed money for this and that and the other thing. And within 6 months, I gave him roughly $2,000 a month for 6 months. So $350 once every 6 weeks ain't bad. But I think I was never very good at that whole sex thing.
How do you mean?
Well, in that I was almost always drawn to guys only if they were gorgeous.
Okay.
GQ cover material, okay?
Okay.
And in retrospect, I realized I passed up an awful lot of guys who were incredibly sexy, but they weren't conventionally beautiful, and so they didn't register on my radar. And I also mistakenly got the nutty notion in my head that if a guy wanted me sexually, that meant he accepted me as a human being, okay? Ergo, if somebody didn't want me sexually, that meant I was worthless, okay? And that's a really fucked up equation that can cause you an awful lot of damage.
Right.
So being sexually successful became very loaded for me, psychologically, and it also meant that on occasion, not always, but on occasion, the sense of the weight of responsibility about performing was huge. Because if a guy wanted me sexually, then I needed to provide whatever it was that he wanted in order to confirm that I was a worthwhile human being. Does that make any sense?
Yes.
Okay, fine. So it was never relaxed and easygoing. For me, sex, it was always fraught with so much crap.
Yeah.
So it's so wonderful to be relieved of all that. Now, I've been relieved of it gradually over time. This didn't just happen, like in the last few years. It was also very difficult for me when I hit around the age of 40. I looked younger than I was, and at the age of 40, I could get 21-year-old guys. Often thought I couldn't, but I could. And gorgeous guy, still. 50, no, not really. And so in that 40 to 50 period, the transition was very difficult for me. I had invested so much of my sense of self-worth in being beautiful and desirable and all that stuff. And when I wasn't anymore, and friends would say, Alan, you're still a good-looking man. It didn't matter. It didn't matter. And there was that long period, that decade and longer, when I still went to bars. I wasn't successful. I drank too much. I turned to drugs. And it was a very messy, unhappy, miserable period. So much so that from around the age of 45, I was often thinking of suicide. And then, fortunately, I stumbled into Al-Anon. See, I grew up in a violent alcoholic home. Dad was a violent alcoholic. And kids who grow up in alcoholic homes normally think they're the reason things aren't good. Because as a child,
Right.
you don't have the mental ability of an adult so that you can figure that stuff out. So they'll do everything they possibly can to try to make things right. They'll do better in school, they'll behave better, they'll do more chores. It doesn't work.
Right.
Okay? Well, if it doesn't work, then they obviously are insufficient. And you grow up with these voices inside your head, which are endlessly tormenting. You didn't try hard enough, you did da-da. If you were better, things would have worked out. If you weren't who you are, he wouldn't be beating her. And as an adult, you still have those voices inside your head. I wouldn't bother, it won't work out, they probably won't like you, da-da-da-da. And I'm convinced that the reason most people who commit suicide shoot themselves in the head is to silence the voices, the relentless voices that keep telling them they're insufficient, they're not attractive enough, they're not rich enough, they're not successful enough, nobody's going to like that, it won't work out. So Al-Anon taught me that those voices were not somehow an inherent part of myself, that they were like a visitation from outside. And I started talking back to them. I named them Sid Vicious. And I would be heading off to teach a class. And they would start up, you're not well prepared enough, the students are going to realize it, some of your students are brighter than you are, they're going to see you as a fraud. And I would say, Sid, you know what, I'm real busy right now, so I'll get back to you later, okay? And that began quieting them, since they were not an inherent part of me, they were something else. So that kind of saved my life. Not kind of, it did save my life.
And how long were you in Al-Anon for?
Well, I was a devoted member of Al-Anon for 2 solid years. And I, in fact, created 4 Al-Anon groups, 2 in Boston and 2 in Paris.
Wow.
Because I was teaching at the University of Paris, and so I created a regular Al-Anon meeting there, and also a meeting for adult children of alcoholics.
How did you know that it was for you, that you needed to go?
I didn't. I had a roommate at the time. Suddenly was vanishing on a regular basis, and I asked him one time what he was doing, and he said, I'm going to Al-Anon meetings. I said, what's Al-Anon? He explained. And he said, you might be interested. He knew that I'd grown up in an alcoholic home. And he heard me talking to my parents every 2 or 3 weeks on the phone, and he knew that I always ended by screaming at them, because I thought, if it hadn't been for them, I would have a better life, and if only the hotel is paved with certain sentences that begin, if only and what if. And my entire life I had thought, if only I had been born with richer parents. If only my parents had been educated. If only Dad hadn't been an alcoholic. If only okay? And that they're guarantees of misery, those thoughts. So a roommate said, there's a meeting tomorrow, Sunday, at Trinity Church, and you might find it interesting. So, fine. Then my dad called Sunday morning, drunk. And whenever Dad called drunk, if I complained, when he sobered up, he remembered that and he resented it. If I didn't complain, when he sobered up, he forgot he'd called. He just had to have a blackout, okay? So, and it always put me in sent me around the bend for like a good 48 hours. So I hung up. I was in an emotional mess. I was in emotional mess, and then I remembered he said, "Oh, there's that meeting." So I went, and I sat there listening to these people, and I thought, this is really bizarre, and I have nothing in common with these people. Finally, somebody asked me why I was there, and I explained Dad had called drunk and da-da-da-da-da. And it was a no-win situation. And somebody said, why didn't you write him a letter asking him to stop? And then somebody else said, yes, but don't mail it right away. Sleep on it overnight. I went home, I wrote a letter. I slept on it overnight. I got up the next morning, I read it. I was appalled. The letter was so full of fury. It was like, what the fuck do you think you're God damn it, sick and fucking tired of it, huh? So I rewrote it. Dad, I really would appreciate it if da-da-da-da-da-da. I sent the letter. He never again called me drunk. He never referred to the letter, but he never did it again. And I thought, I think there's something here for me. So I started going, and gradually those voices in my head saying you're insufficient, you're unlovable, you're a failure, they began calming down. And then about a week or 10 days after I went to my first Al-Anon meeting, I was walking on Clarendon, and I got in front of the Hancock building around about noon, and people were spilling out of the building for lunch, just like hundreds of people on the sidewalk.
Oh, yeah.
And I was reading this bookmark that they give you in Al-Anon and AA and other 12-step meetings, and it was titled Just for Today. And it says things like, just for today, I don't know, I'll do something nice to somebody anonymously, just for today, da-da-da-da-da. And I turned it over and I read, just for today, I will try to live my life without fear. And I became riveted to the sidewalk and I began weeping, with the realization that my entire life I had been fueled by fear. I mean, from infancy on, fueled constantly by fear. And that the sense of the weight of all of that suddenly beginning to lift, it was miraculous. And so then I became a devoted member of Al-Anon, as I said, for about 2 years. And then I stopped going. And then a few years later, I realized, oh my God, I am an alcoholic. So I started going to AA. And again, I was a devoted attendee for about 2 years. And then I got really fed up with it because all 12-step programs insist on being apolitical. Okay? And if something's wrong in your life, that's your doing. And I don't buy that shit. No, we all live in a cultural, social, and political context.
Right.
Okay? And an awful lot of the people who are homeless, it's not their fault, which is why we should have more halfway houses in the United States. So I got tired of the apolitical stance, and I got tired of hearing people in AA without the benefit of Al-Anon dumping on their parents and dumping on the past. I heard a lot of if only and what if shit. And that's not helpful. So I stopped going. And I stopped going to AA, it's now at least 10 years ago.
Well, it's interesting because with escorts, at least you don't have to go to a bar. Like, it doesn't require any sort of alcohol.
Right.
You know?
Well, you can go to a bar and drink orange juice or mineral water.
I suppose that's quite
true.
true.
But you're absolutely right. I am not drawn to bars. They don't have any point in my life anymore. I'll go with somebody if they want to go to a bar, and I'll have a Diet Coke. And here, Sharon, to your great surprise, is the bathroom.
Wow. These are really interesting pieces.
The ceramic pieces?
Mm-hmm.
They're made by a guy called Christopher Adams, who is a dermatologist. But as a freshman at Harvard, he discovered a kiln in the basement of his house. And he began fiddling around, and one thing led to another. He studied with some people, had a mentor, and now he shows in galleries and museums. I love his work, as you can see, since I obsessively acquired a lot of it. I have about 60 pieces here, I think. I bought 3, and I didn't know where to put them, and I thought, well, let's put them above the bathtub, and then I thought they look sort of lonely, the 3, so then I added another 20. And then I liked that so much, I thought, well, why not do that wall too?
Very nice.
And this is one of my favorite scholar rocks. This is also called a Ling Long Yin rock, like the other one in the dining area.
What do you do with your time now?
Well, it's funny you ask. I am amazed that I ever was able to do what I did when I had a full-time job. Because, let's say, the 70 hours a week was really 60 hours a week, okay? But in addition, I taught free courses at Arlington Street Church, which is my church. It's Unitarian, and atheists go to Unitarian churches, and Buddhists and lapsed Catholics and everything. It's a very welcoming congregation. I taught free courses at Arlington Street Church. I reviewed books for the Boston Globe. I was a dance critic for South End News and Bay Windows and the world's largest dance website, now called dancetabs.com. I traveled. I mean, you know, like 2 trips a year, substantial, like to Europe for 2 weeks and stuff like that. I gardened. I had a social life. I had people in to dinner at least every 2 weeks. And I've always cleaned my own home. I've never had anybody come in and do that. So I managed to do all of that. I know I slept less during that period. What do I do now? I have a very full life. I still teach courses at Arlington Street Church. I still write dance reviews. I'm in a book club that I absolutely adore, that I founded around the time I retired. I still travel. So this past year I was in Turkey, Morocco, Croatia, Venice, and I just got back from 5 days in Indianapolis. So 5 trips in 1 year. But my favorite thing is to lie on that couch reading at night. I watch a movie at night. I stay up till 5 and 6 in the morning. I'm a real night owl. And I've got to the point in my life, I have people in to dinner maybe twice a year. And if I have to do more than one thing a day, I feel so oppressed. No, I just feel like it's being so unfair to me. And when I think back, you know, that in a day, I would go in, I would teach 3 classes. I would come home and work on a dance review. I would then clean the apartment because people were coming to dinner. I'd cook the dinner and they'd leave, and then I'd read some student papers and mark them up and down. I can't believe it. I mean, we do what we have to do, but I love my retirement so much, and I love not having to do what I don't want to do. I mean, I'm terribly spoiled. I think I'm probably not fit to be a partner in a love relationship because I'm so spoiled. And I really do almost nothing I don't want to do. I keep thinking about retiring as a dance critic, and then I keep thinking, no, I should keep it going because it's one of the few ways I still have left to exercise my brain. So,
which is good. Yeah, that's
important. It is good, and the free tickets are good too. And my friends like them. So I have what I think of as an extremely busy, full life, and I absolutely adore it.
Well, where do you do your gardening, by the way?
Where I do it on my roof deck.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah. I did it as a kid. Very early on, I got the bug from my grandmother, who was an ardent gardener, and I mean everything. She had an orchard with pear trees, apple trees, plum trees, peach trees, had a grape arbor, had a huge vegetable garden. She and my grandfather lived out of that. She canned 500 jars of tomatoes every autumn. And then flowers everywhere on their property. And so I learned as a kid about gardening, and I've always been passionate about that.